pushing us to think more about how political communication scholars and scholarship interact with what's happening outside of the academy. And so I have two questions that are motivating my talk today. The first is, are we doing enough to incorporate the real world into our scholarship? And I'm going to argue to you that we are not. Too much of our scholarship is divorced from the real world. And this is not to say that the scholarship we have isn't important. That's not the claim that I'm making. It definitely is. And it would be a mistake to have a field that did not work to develop theories that may be of little interest to practitioners. It would also be a mistake to have research acting solely in the service of practice. If we did so, we'd be consultants, not academics. I do think, though, that we have to find some form of a middle ground, because it would also be a mistake to have a field that doesn't overlap with real-world contexts, and I think we can do more as a field. So my next question is, what should we do about it? So what I'm going to outline today are 3 areas of intersections between the real world and our practices by looking at theory, methodology, and implications, and implore all of us to really think through how our research orients us toward these perspectives and how we can change what we're doing to try to increase the real-world relevance of our work. So to start with, I would like us to think about the real world and theory. And my question for us here is, are we building theory based on real-world observation? My essential argument is that there are 2 ways to approach theory in the real world. One way is to take our existing theories and refine them or apply them in real-world contexts. And we do this routinely. So look at ICA, at the papers and the panels that are being presented here, and you'll see many theories that we hold near and dear in our field, from agenda setting to spiral of silence to many others. And I think that we're doing well applying these sorts of theories to other contexts. So does the spiral of silence and agenda setting work in the real world? How are they changed by digital environments? I think we're doing a good job with this sort of work. But there's a second approach that I think we haven't done enough of, and that is to observe the real world and then create new theories. I don't think we're as good at this. We spend a great deal of time on deductive thinking and not as much on inductive thinking. And I don't think that we train our students to think inductively. We do far more work thinking deductively. Now, there are certainly examples of this type of work, of this inductive thinking. I'm thinking of Rod Hart's recent book on civic hope, where he analyzes letters to the editor over many decades, or recent work on populism from several members in our division. I think we can do more to draw inspiration from the real world and to think of new theories about why things happen. There are so many things to observe to find new theories. Look at how people behave on social media and how that's changing our norms. How is the increasing reach of news on demand changing the way we retain political information? And what implications does that have for our research and teaching? What circumstances serve to reduce political polarization? I think we have a lot to do in this area to draw inspiration from the real world in order to inform and create new theories. My next area of contention and argument for you is the real world and methodology. And as I was preparing for this talk and reflecting back on ICAs that I've attended in the past, I thought to myself, I think I attended a talk when I was a graduate student at ICA where someone made a similar point, which is not a good thing that I'm standing up here making a related point. But we know we have problems with some of our critical and fast-held methodologies. We have critiqued surveys for measures of media exposure, and we all know that they are not measuring what we think they're measuring in many instances, yet we continue to use them. We also know that surveys have tremendous problems with generalizability, and we know that response rates are declining for those surveys that attempt generalizability. So we have critical issues with methodology, at least in the survey world, that make it difficult to recognize how we can then translate the findings from surveys to the real world. And, experiments are not exempt from this. In an experimental context, how sure are we that what we find within the confines of the lab will actually apply outside? So I think we need to be thinking more deeply, and I don't mean to completely discount this work. I've done surveys, I've done experiments as well, but I think we could be more thoughtful about checking to make sure that our results have real-world meaning. I think we need to do more field research. I think we need to think more about partnering with other organizations. As a brief example, one project that I did with Alex Curry, Cynthia Peacock, and Emily Van Doon, we did online experiments to analyze how people looked at different websites. And we did it using an online experiment. But then we said, let's find out if this works in the real world. We partnered with 2 news organizations undergoing site redesigns. We asked them if they would be willing to partner with us to randomly assign people to see these designs. And then we were able to get real-world data after that to demonstrate that what we were finding in a lab artificial context was actually holding true in the real world. Another example is the work done by Lucas Graves, Brendan Nyhan, and Jason Reifler in the Journal of Communication, where they did a fact-checking experiment to understand what motivates news organizations to adopt fact-checking. And although I'm discussing methodology, there are theoretical questions here too. Why is it that an experimental context might not translate into the real world? Well, perhaps it's because theoretically people are experiencing some psychological reactance to that context that then motivates them to respond differently to the stimuli. So I think that there are theoretical ways to address the conflict between the real world and the methodologies that we use. And then the final one, the one that I want to end on, is the relationship between the real world and our results. And I have 2 questions here. First, are our results useful, and are they used? So let's start with a thought experiment. I want you to think about a recent issue of your favorite academic journal. And now imagine that you were to give takeaways from that issue to someone in a seemingly related field, like an elected official, a strategist, a news executive, or a citizens group. How hard would that be? On this question, I actually could see 2 competing arguments that I would find compelling. But let me pose a second question where I think the answer is more clear-cut. How likely are these people to ever hear about the recommendations that exist? And here I think we have a lot of work to do as a field and as we think forward about the future of political communication research. As a model, look at the recently published paper in Political Communication by Daniel Kreis and Shannon McGregor about how the platforms like Facebook and Google worked with political campaigns in the 2016 election. That's informed media reporting on the topic and is informing the US Congress. Or look at what Rasmus has done, sharing findings with the IJPP under his editorship. Again, there are theoretical questions here too that can guide us when we think about how to make our results more real-world applicable. Why are women less likely to engage in political talk, and how can we work to increase the probability that they do so, as an example? There are many examples that meet these goals that I've outlined here, and much of it has been done by people in this room. So I sincerely hope that today I'm not just preaching to the choir. I imagine that each of us in some way could boost our contribution as we think about our research as it relates to the real world, even if it's a small way. I know that I personally could do better. I hope and I think that it's our connection to the real world that's an important one as we look to our scholarship in the coming years, and I will be delighted to chat with all of you and hear your thoughts on this.